When Elijah Boone stepped into that luxury hotel, his weathered boots leaving traces of red Missouri clay on pristine marble floors, no one saw anything but an old black farmer who didn't belong. The manager's cruel mockery echoed through the lobby. "If you can afford the worst room, I'll give you the suite." But when Elijah quietly handed over a single envelope, the laughter died instantly. What secret could this humble man possibly hold? Behind his dignified silence lies a decades-old story of forbidden love, brutal separation, and a promise that never died. As a dying little girl waits in a hospital bed, wearing a bright blue headscarf and clinging to fading hope, 3 generations are about to collide in a revelation that will shake the foundations of wealth, privilege, and identity. The land that everyone overlooked is about to reveal its true value, and it isn't measured in money. Follow our channel now for stories that will break your heart and heal it again. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and join thousands who can't look away from the truth that's finally being uncovered. The brass bell above the entrance rang with a hollow chime as Elijah Boone stepped into the marble-floored lobby of the Golden Pine Hotel. The sound seemed to hang in the air, out of place, much like the man himself. The Golden Pine wasn't just any hotel. It was the crown jewel of luxury accommodations in southern Missouri, a place where politicians, celebrities, and old money went to be seen. Elijah didn't belong there, not according to the stares that followed him across the pristine lobby floor. His faded linen shirt hung loose on his wiry frame, the color washed out from years of sun and hard work. His pants, several sizes too large, were held up by suspenders that had seen better days. But it was his boots that drew the most attention. Heavy work boots caked with red Missouri clay that left faint traces with each deliberate step he took across the immaculate white marble floor. Under his arm he clutched a straw hat, battered and misshapen from years of use, pressed against his side like a shield. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, catching the sweat beading across Elijah's forehead. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, carved more by decades under the relentless sun than by his 70-some years. Deep creases framed eyes that seemed to hold stories no one had bothered to hear. As he made his way toward the reception desk, the ambient chatter in the lobby dwindled. Heads turned. A woman in a designer dress pulled her purse closer, as though proximity alone might taint her belongings. A businessman in an Italian suit stepped aside, creating unnecessary distance between himself and the old black farmer. But Elijah noticed none of it. Or perhaps more accurately, he had learned long ago not to show that he noticed. He walked with the quiet dignity of a man who carried worlds on his shoulders, and he did, though none of the onlookers could possibly know what weight he truly bore. Behind the reception desk, the hotel manager, a young man with slicked-back blonde hair, a too-tight blazer, and a carefully practiced smile, didn't even bother to look up from his phone. The gold nameplate on his chest read, "Bradley Wilkes Manager." "Can I help you?" Bradley asked, his voice dripping with practiced courtesy that failed to mask his impatience. "Need a room," Elijah replied, his voice deep and weathered like old leather, but clear and steady. "Just for tonight." The manager's fingers paused mid-scroll. He glanced up just briefly, his eyes making a quick assessment before returning to his screen. "What's your price range, sir?" "The cheapest you got," Elijah said. "Don't need nothing fancy, just a place to rest." At this, Bradley finally set his phone down and looked up properly. His eyes narrowed as they took in the full sight of Elijah. The worn clothes, the dirty boots, the calloused hands resting on the polished marble countertop. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. "The cheapest," he repeated, his voice rising just enough to attract attention from nearby guests. "Our economy rooms start at $400 a night, sir." Something in his tone made it clear he didn't believe Elijah could afford it. 2 well-dressed men standing nearby exchanged amused glances. Elijah nodded slowly. "That'll do fine." Bradley's smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth. He leaned forward slightly, speaking louder now as if performing for an audience. "If you can afford our worst room, I'll give you the suite." The declaration hung in the air. A bark of laughter erupted from one of the men at the bar, followed by the titter of a woman in a cocktail dress. Even the bellhop couldn't suppress a smirk. Elijah didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice or change his expression. He simply looked directly at Bradley with eyes that had seen too much of the world to be wounded by such small cruelties. In his gaze was something more dangerous than anger, a silence full of memory and knowledge. Slowly, deliberately, Elijah reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out an envelope. It was crumpled at the edges, stained with the same red dust that covered his boots. He placed it gently on the counter between them, his weathered fingers lingering for just a moment before withdrawing. Bradley's smirk remained frozen as he picked up the envelope, a performance of confident disdain for his audience. With theatrical flair, he opened the flap and froze. The color drained from his face. Inside was a check, signed by the very owner of the hotel chain himself, Walter Callahan. Next to it, a handwritten note on cream-colored stationery bearing the Golden Pine emblem. "Mr. Boone, your stay is on me. Always. Any property. Any time." Bradley's hands trembled slightly as he looked up at Elijah, his mouth opening and closing like a fish suddenly pulled from water. I didn't realize, Mr. Boone, But the damage was done. The silence in the lobby had taken on a different quality now, the sharp, uncomfortable silence of collective embarrassment. For the first time since entering the hotel, Elijah allowed himself a small, gentle smile, not of triumph, but of quiet dignity that had never left him, even when others tried to strip it away. "The suite will do fine," he said softly. And for the first time, the world truly looked at Elijah Boone, but none of them knew who he really was. Not yet. The transformation in Bradley Wilkes was instantaneous and extraordinary. His smug demeanor melted away like ice under a summer sun, replaced by a veneer of desperate professionalism. His hands, still trembling slightly, returned the envelope to Elijah with an exaggerated care that bordered on reverence. "Mr. Boone, please accept my sincerest apologies for the misunderstanding," Bradley said, his voice now honeyed with false warmth. "Let me personally escort you to our presidential suite." The lobby, still wrapped in uncomfortable silence, parted as Bradley hustled around the counter. He snapped his fingers at a nearby bellhop who rushed forward to take Elijah's weathered duffel bag, the only luggage the old man had brought. "Oh, that's all right, son," Elijah said, gently stopping the young bellhop with a raised hand. "I can carry my own things. Been doing it for 73 years now." As Bradley led Elijah toward the elevator, the manager's mind raced with possibilities and fears. Who was this old farmer that had Walter Callahan himself, the billionaire owner of the entire Golden Pine chain, writing personal notes? The possibilities made Bradley's collar feel suddenly tight against his neck. "We're so honored to have you with us, Mr. Boone," Bradley babbled as they stepped into the mirrored elevator. "The presidential suite offers panoramic views of the Ozarks. The bathtub has 23 jets. The minibar is fully stocked, all complimentary, of course." Elijah merely nodded, saying nothing. His silence made Bradley even more nervous, filling the small elevator with words like they might serve as some kind of shield. "If there's anything, absolutely anything you need during your stay, I'm at your personal disposal. My direct line is programmed into the suite phone. One touch and I'll answer, day or night." As they walked down the hallway of the top floor, its walls adorned with tasteful artwork and subtle lighting, Elijah paused unexpectedly. Bradley nearly stumbled, trying to stop his momentum. "Something wrong, Mr. Boone?" Bradley asked, anxiety creeping into his voice. Elijah stood motionless, his eyes fixed on a large black-and-white photograph hanging in an ornate frame. The photograph showed a group of men standing in what appeared to be a vast wheat field, mountains visible in the distant background. The men, mostly in work clothes, some in suits, stood proudly before what looked like a newly built farmhouse. Bradley, noticing Elijah's interest, cleared his throat nervously. "Ah, that's from the ranch that belonged to Mr. Callahan's grandfather. The original property before the hotel business began," he explained, eager to show off his knowledge of company history. "There are rumors that the farmer who owned that land disappeared mysteriously. No heirs came forward to claim it." Elijah's weathered finger reached up, not quite touching the glass covering the photograph. His eyes seemed to search the faces in the image, lingering on one particular figure partially obscured in the back row. "Some things disappear so they can grow in silence," Elijah murmured, more to himself than to Bradley. "I'm sorry," Bradley said, not quite understanding. Elijah turned away from the photo, his expression unreadable. "Nothing important. Let's continue." The presidential suite was a testament to luxury. 1,200 square feet of opulence with floor-to-ceiling windows, custom furniture, and a terrace overlooking the rolling hills of southern Missouri. Bradley fussed around, pointing out features and amenities, while Elijah stood quietly in the center of the main room, looking somewhat out of place among such extravagance. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Boone?" Bradley finally asked, running out of things to showcase. "No, thank you," Elijah replied simply. "I appreciate your help." After Bradley left, closing the door with an obsequious bow, Elijah's shoulders relaxed slightly. He placed his duffel bag on the king-sized bed and opened it with careful hands. Inside, beyond the neatly folded clothes, much simpler than one might expect from someone commanding such deference, lay a fabric-bound notebook, its cover worn smooth from years of handling. Beside it was a framed photograph of a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with a bright smile that revealed a missing front tooth. Despite her obvious illness, evidenced by the absence of hair and the thinness of her face, her eyes sparkled with an irrepressible joy. Elijah lifted the photo gently, as if it were made of the thinnest glass, and pressed his lips to the frame. "Hold on, Mabel," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. "Grandpa's going to make it right." He set the photograph on the nightstand and walked to the bathroom, its marble surfaces gleaming under soft, recessed lighting. The mirror above the sink reflected his tired face, the lines of worry and determination etched deeply around his eyes. Taped to the corner of the mirror was a small note, the paper yellowed with age. "Don't forget your promise. Don't say who you are, not until the right moment." It was signed simply, M. Elijah touched the note gently, then splashed cold water on his face. Tomorrow would be a crucial day, and he needed his strength. From his pocket, he pulled out a prescription bottle and placed it beside the sink. The label read, "Mabel Boone, take as directed, Memorial Children's Hospital." As the evening light faded beyond the windows, casting long shadows across the luxurious room, Elijah Boone sat on the edge of the massive bed, a man both out of place and exactly where he needed to be. The farmer's weathered hands, calloused from decades of hard work, now held the fabric-bound notebook, turning its pages slowly, as if each one contained fragments of a life carefully preserved. Outside the suite, Bradley Wilkes stood at the reception desk, staring at his computer screen. He had pulled up the payment authorization for Elijah's stay, a transaction pre-approved months ago by the corporate office. In the notes field, a single line of text, "Boone Foundation Annual Agricultural Sustainability Grant." Bradley's fingers hovered over his keyboard, his curiosity burning. Who exactly was this old man in dusty boots who commanded such respect from the hotel's billionaire owner? And why did he feel so uneasy about the whole situation? Dawn broke over the rolling hills of Missouri, painting the landscape in soft pinks and golds. Elijah Boone was already awake, sitting on the balcony of the presidential suite with a cup of black coffee growing cold between his weathered hands. He had slept little, his mind too full of memories and worries that stretched across decades like shadows at sunset. The grandeur of the suite stood in stark contrast to the simplicity of the man occupying it. Elijah wore the same faded clothes as the day before, though he had brushed the Missouri clay from his boots. His presence in such opulence was like finding a wild daisy growing in the perfectly manicured gardens below, beautiful in its authenticity, but somehow not meant to be there. At precisely 7:15 a.m., Elijah collected his few belongings, tucked the precious photograph of Mabel into his breast pocket, and left the suite. He moved through the quiet morning corridors like a ghost, avoiding the staff preparing for the day. Only the lone security guard at the service entrance noticed him slip away, nodding a silent greeting as the old farmer passed. Meanwhile, Bradley Wilkes had arrived early, dark circles under his eyes, betraying a night of restless research. He had spent hours digging through company records, searching for any mention of the name Boone. What he discovered had left him shaken. The Boone Foundation was responsible for donating over 5,000 acres of prime agricultural land to the state's sustainable farming initiative. That land now produced enough crops to feed half of Missouri's food-insecure population. The donor had remained anonymous to the public, but internal documents made it clear. Elijah Boone was the benefactor. "Who is this man?" Bradley muttered, scrolling through tax records and property deeds with increasing agitation. The Callahan fortune had been built on agriculture before expanding into hotels, but nowhere in the official company history was there mention of Elijah Boone. Yet Walter Callahan had personally authorized unlimited stays for him at any Golden Pine property worldwide. Bradley's computer chimed with a new email notification. The subject line read, "Re-urgent, Boone guest inquiry." The sender was Walter Callahan's executive assistant. The message was brief. Mr. Wilkes, Mr. Callahan has been notified of your database searches regarding Mr. Boone. He requests that you cease all inquiries immediately and ensure Mr. Boone's privacy is respected during his stay. This is a direct order. Bradley's hand trembled as he closed the laptop. Whatever connection existed between Callahan and Boone, it was clearly not something to be investigated by a hotel manager. 20 miles away from the Golden Pine, Elijah pulled his ancient pickup truck into the parking lot of Memorial Children's Hospital. The building was modern and bright, with colorful murals adorning its exterior walls, a cheerful facade for a place that housed so much pain and hope. At the reception desk, the nurse's face lit up with recognition. "Mr. Boone, she's been asking for you all morning." Elijah's weathered face softened. "How is she today, Nurse Jenkins?" The nurse's smile faltered slightly. "She had a rough night, but she's in good spirits now. The doctor wants to speak with you, though." Elijah nodded, his expression betraying nothing, but his grip tightened on the small gift bag he carried. Room 312 was decorated with paper butterflies hanging from the ceiling and drawings taped to every available surface. In the center of it all was a small bed where Mabel Boone sat cross-legged, a blue headscarf covering her hairless head. Despite the IV line connected to her thin arm and the monitors beeping steadily beside her, she beamed when she saw her grandfather. "Grandpa," she exclaimed, her voice stronger than her frail body suggested. "You came back." Elijah's entire demeanor transformed in her presence. The stoic farmer melted away, replaced by a grandfather whose universe revolved around this one child. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and gathered her gently in his arms. "Course I came back, little bird. Got something for you too." He pulled a small wooden carving from the gift bag, a delicate butterfly with wings painted in vibrant blues and purples. Mabel gasped with delight, her fingers tracing the intricate details. "Did you make this? It's beautiful." "Started it 3 days ago," Elijah said, pride evident in his voice. "Finished the painting this morning before the sun was up." As Mabel admired her gift, Dr. Sarah Chen entered the room, her clipboard clutched tightly against her chest, a gesture Elijah had come to recognize as a shield before delivering difficult news. "Mr. Boone, could I speak with you in the hallway for a moment?" Elijah kissed Mabel's forehead before following the doctor out. In the sterile hospital corridor, Dr. Chen didn't waste time with pleasantries. "The experimental treatment protocol we discussed is our best hope now," she said, her voice low and urgent. "But there's been a complication with the insurance authorization. They're refusing to cover it because it's still classified as experimental." Elijah's face remained impassive, though something flickered in his eyes, a momentary flash of desperation quickly suppressed. "What's the cost?" he asked simply. "Doctor," Chen hesitated. "The full treatment course is $475,000. We need at least half by Friday to secure Mabel's place in the trial." The enormity of the sum hung in the air between them. For most people, it would be an impossible mountain to climb. Elijah merely nodded, as if she had told him the price of a bushel of corn. "I'll have it," he said with quiet certainty. "Just make sure her place is held." Dr. Chen's professional composure cracked, revealing genuine concern. "Mr. Boone, I know you've already spent everything on the preliminary treatments. The farm, your savings." "The farm was just land," Elijah interrupted gently. "Mabel is my heart. I'll have the money by Friday." Back in the hotel, Bradley was growing increasingly agitated as he monitored the front desk, watching for Elijah's return. The mystery of the old farmer consumed him, a puzzle with pieces that didn't seem to fit together. An elderly maintenance worker named Earl was replacing a light fixture in the lobby when Bradley approached him. "Earl, you've been with Golden Pine for what, 30 years?" The old man nodded, carefully descending his ladder. 37 come August. Bradley lowered his voice. "That guest in the presidential suite, Elijah Boone, do you recognize him?" Earl's wrinkled face went perfectly still, his eyes darting nervously to the hotel entrance before leaning closer to Bradley. "I know that man," Earl whispered, his voice barely audible, "but he had a different name back then. He was the foreman who disappeared after the owner's daughter got pregnant." Before Earl could continue, a hotel guest approached the front desk, ending the conversation. But Bradley had heard enough to know that the mystery of Elijah Boone ran deeper than he could have imagined, and somehow he himself might be caught in its tangled web. Evening shadows stretched across the Golden Pine's marble floors, as Bradley Wilkes paced the empty corridor of the executive floor. The conversation with Earl had left him profoundly unsettled, like discovering the foundation of a building you'd worked in for years was built on shifting sand. His phone buzzed with messages from the corporate office, more warnings to cease his investigation into Elijah Boone. But Bradley couldn't stop now. Something about this mystery felt personally significant in ways he couldn't yet articulate. The presidential suite stood empty and silent. Bradley knew Elijah hadn't returned since morning. The security system would have registered his keycard. This presented an opportunity that both tempted and terrified the young manager. Invading a guest's privacy was grounds for immediate termination, but if that guest had some connection to the Callahan family history, to Bradley's own employer, with trembling hands, Bradley used his master key to enter the suite. The spaciousness of the luxury accommodations made Elijah's few possessions seem even more modest. His worn duffel bag sat at the foot of the meticulously made bed. The old farmer had even refused housekeeping service, leaving the suite in perfect order himself. Bradley moved through the room with the careful steps of a trespasser, his conscience screaming even as his curiosity drove him forward. The duffel bag was simple canvas, patched in several places with careful stitches. Bradley hesitated only a moment before unzipping it, revealing neatly folded clothes and a small wooden box containing a pocket watch. Beneath these lay the fabric-bound notebook he'd glimpsed the day before. "This is wrong," Bradley whispered to himself, even as his fingers lifted the notebook from the bag. The binding was worn smooth from years of handling. Opening it revealed pages filled with elegant handwriting, the ink faded in places but still legible. They weren't journal entries as Bradley had expected, but letters, dozens of them, all addressed to the same person, Helen Grace Willoughby. Bradley's breath caught. Willoughby was the maiden name of Walter Callahan's mother. The letters were dated chronologically, spanning decades. Bradley flipped to an early one, dated June 17, 1975. "My dearest Helen, the wheat is high this summer, golden under the Missouri sun. Your father's land has never been more beautiful, though I see it now only in memories. I wonder if you ever received my first letters. I wonder if they were kept from you as I was kept from you. He never knew. They never allowed me to tell the truth about your son." Bradley's hands shook so violently that he nearly dropped the notebook. "Your son." The words seemed to burn on the page. Walter Callahan had no siblings in the official family history, but here was evidence suggesting what exactly. He flipped to a later letter, dated December 2, 1992. "Helen, today I saw your boy on television. He's the spitting image of you, the same determined expression, the same fire in his eyes. He's built the Golden Pine into an empire now. I feel a father's pride, though he doesn't know my name. Perhaps that's for the best. The world wouldn't understand a love like ours cross the lines that it did, but I keep my promise to watch over him from a distance, even when it breaks my heart to remain a shadow." Bradley sat heavily on the edge of the bed, the implications washing over him like cold water. Walter Callahan, the billionaire hotel magnate, son of the prestigious Willoughby family. Could he be the child of Elijah Boone? A secret kept buried for nearly 50 years. A gentle knock at the suite door jolted Bradley from his thoughts. He shoved the notebook back into the duffel bag, zipping it closed with fumbling fingers. "Housekeeping," called a woman's voice. Bradley yanked open the door to find Dolores Martinez, the hotel's head housekeeper, standing with fresh towels in her arms. Her eyes widened at the sight of him. "Mr. Wilkes? I thought Mr. Boone might have returned," she said, suspicion evident in her tone. "Just checking that everything is in order," Bradley replied, the lie bitter on his tongue. "Mr. Boone is a special guest." Dolores's expression softened unexpectedly. "Yes, he is special," she agreed, but there was something in her voice, a familiarity that suggested more than professional courtesy. She hesitated in the doorway, seeming to debate with herself before speaking again. "I knew him, you know, many years ago." Bradley's heart rate quickened. "You knew Mr. Boone?" Dolores stepped into the suite, closing the door behind her. At 65, she was the hotel's longest-serving employee, having started as a young maid in the original Golden Pine before the chain expanded. "It was 1974, she said quietly, her accent thickening with memory. "I was new in America, just a girl cleaning rooms. The Willoughby estate was our biggest client. We prepared their hunting lodge for family vacations." She set the towels down, her weathered hands smoothing the fabric absently. That summer I helped hide a pregnant young woman on a small farm where mixed blood wasn't welcome. Bradley's mouth went dry. Helen Willoughby? Dolores nodded, tears forming in her dark eyes. She was so young, so afraid. Her father would have destroyed her if he knew she loved a black man, and not just any man, but his own foreman. She looked up at Bradley, her gaze sharp despite her tears. Elijah saved them both. He gave up everything to protect that mother and child. The implications struck Bradley like a physical blow. If Walter Callahan was that child, why is he here now? Bradley asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dolores touched a small gold crucifix at her throat, a nervous gesture. You're here for him, aren't you? She asked, her eyes filling with tears. After all these years? For who? Bradley pressed, confusion clouding his features. For your son, Dolores whispered, the one who doesn't know what this all means. Before Bradley could respond, his phone buzzed with an alert. Elijah's keycard had just been used at the service entrance. Panic seized him as he realized he was about to be caught trespassing in a guest's room. I have to go, he said hurriedly, moving toward the door. Please don't tell him I was here. Dolores caught his arm, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. He's a good man, Mr. Wilkes. Better than most who've walked through these doors draped in gold and silk. Whatever you're looking for, remember that. As Bradley slipped out of the suite, his mind reeled with questions. The mystery of Elijah Boone had just grown exponentially more complex, and somehow impossibly seemed to be intertwining with his own story in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. In the elevator down to the lobby, Bradley clutched the railing for support, those words from the letter echoing in his mind. He never knew. They never allowed me to tell the truth about your son. A terrifying thought was taking shape in Bradley's mind, one that threatened to upend everything he believed about himself, about his place in the world. But it couldn't be possible. It was too incredible, too coincidental. And yet, as the elevator doors opened to reveal Elijah Boone crossing the lobby with his quiet dignity, Bradley felt something shift inside him, a recognition beyond knowledge, as if some part of his blood and bones knew what his mind was still struggling to accept. The revelation hit Bradley like a physical blow as he sat alone in his office, surrounded by the framed accolades of his meteoric rise through the Golden Pine management ranks. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm inside him. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Bradley had always known he was adopted. His parents, wealthy, white, and influential in Springfield society, had never hidden that fact, though they'd been vague about the circumstances. A private adoption, they'd always said, a blessing arranged by a family friend. Now he understood those careful phrases in a new, painful light. With trembling hands, he unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out a folder he'd retrieved from his apartment during his lunch break. Inside was his original birth certificate, a document he'd only glanced at once before filing away. Bradley had never felt a need to search for his birth parents. His life had been one of privilege and comfort. The certificate was sparse on details. Mother, Helen Grace Willoughby, age 17. Father, unknown. But it wasn't unknown, was it? Not anymore. The date aligned perfectly with Dolores's story. The location, a private clinic in Kansas City, far from Springfield and the judgmental eyes of Missouri high society, made sense for a scandal being carefully contained. And most damning of all was the notation in the corner. Original birth record sealed by court order. Adoption facilitated by Willoughby Family Trust. His entire life had been built on a foundation of secrets. Bradley Wilkes, born Bradley Hampton, renamed when adopted by the Wilkes family, was the grandson of Thomas Willoughby, one of Missouri's wealthiest landowners. And if Elijah's letters were true, Bradley was also the son of a black farm foreman who had been erased from the family history. Jesus Christ, Bradley whispered, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair until it stood on end. The irony was bitter and sharp. He who had mocked Elijah Boone for his worn clothes and dirty boots might be the old man's son. His phone buzzed with a text message from the front desk. Mr. Boone has returned to the hotel and is heading to his suite. Bradley stood up so quickly that his chair crashed against the wall behind him. He needed answers, needed confirmation, needed to confront the man who might be his father. Logic and caution were drowned by the roaring in his ears as he charged through the hotel corridors. He caught up to Elijah by the elevators, the old man standing patiently with his hands clasped before him, seemingly lost in thought. "Mr. Boone," Bradley called out, his voice strangled with emotion. Elijah turned slowly, his expression neutral, but his eyes watchful. Rain had darkened his shirt at the shoulders and beaded in his grey hair like tiny diamonds. "Mr. Wilkes," he acknowledged with a slight nod. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. What could he say? How does one ask a stranger if he's your father, if your entire existence has been shrouded in shame and secrets? "Are you playing some kind of game with me?" Bradley finally managed, his voice pitched higher than normal. "Who are you really?" The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Elijah stepped inside, his movements unhurried. After a moment of hesitation, Bradley followed him. As soon as the doors closed, enclosing them in the mirrored box, Bradley felt his control slipping. "I know about the letters to Helen Willoughby," he blurted out. "I know about the baby, about me." Elijah's expression remained frustratingly impassive, though something flickered briefly in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or confirmation. "You're messing with my head, old man," Bradley continued, his composed professional demeanor fracturing with each word. "What kind of game is this?" When Elijah finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "It's not a game, it's an inheritance." The cryptic response only fueled Bradley's confusion and anger. An inheritance? What does that even mean? The elevator stopped at the top floor. Elijah stepped out and Bradley followed, increasingly agitated. "Answer me," Bradley demanded, grabbing Elijah's arm as the old man reached the suite door. Elijah turned to face him fully then, and for the first time, Bradley truly looked at the man, beyond the worn clothes and weathered skin. He saw the same determined set of the jaw that greeted him in the mirror each morning, the same slight asymmetry to the eyes, the same hands, though Elijah's were calloused and lined with years of hard labor, while Bradley's were smooth and manicured. "You have no right to come into my life like this," Bradley said, his voice breaking. "To turn everything upside down with what? Some old letters and coincidences?" "I didn't come for you," Elijah replied softly, and the simple statement landed like a slap. Bradley recoiled slightly. "Then why are you here?" Elijah reached into his pocket and withdrew an envelope similar to the one he'd presented at check-in, though this one was crisp and new. He handed it to Bradley without explanation. "I'll be checking out tomorrow morning," Elijah said. "My business here is nearly complete." With that, he entered the suite and closed the door, leaving Bradley standing alone in the hallway, the envelope clutched in his hand. For several long moments, Bradley remained frozen, shock and confusion warring on his face. Then, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, he tore open the envelope. Inside was a land deed, thousands of acres of prime Missouri farmland, and a handwritten note, "Use with wisdom what was taken from you without your knowledge." The deed was made out to a trust named after Mabel Boone. Bradley slid down against the wall until he was sitting on the plush carpet of the hallway. The document splayed across his lap. He was the secret son of Helen Willoughby and Elijah Boone, a truth buried by a powerful family that couldn't accept a mixed-race heir. He had been raised in wealth and privilege, while his biological father had been cast out, forgotten, erased from history. And now that father had returned, not to reclaim a son who'd never known him, but for some other purpose, Bradley couldn't yet comprehend. In the quiet of the empty hallway, with rain drumming against the windows and thunder rolling in the distance, Bradley Wilkes felt the carefully constructed narrative of his life crumbling away. The prestigious education, the fast-track career, the connections that had smoothed his path, all of it built on a foundation of lies and silence. He looked again at the land deed, at the name of the trust's beneficiary, Mabel Boone. Who was she? What connection did she have to Elijah? To him? Bradley rose unsteadily to his feet, determination hardening his features. If Elijah wouldn't give him answers, he would find them himself. Starting with discovering who Mabel Boone was, and why she warranted an inheritance that should have been his. Missouri, 1974. The summer heat pressed down like a physical weight, rippling the air above the endless fields of wheat that surrounded the Willoughby estate. In a secluded corner of the property, far from the main house with its white columns and wraparound porches, stood a weathered barn rarely visited by the family. Inside, a 17-year-old Helen Grace Willoughby sat on a bale of hay, her slender arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Tears streaked her porcelain face, catching the dusty beams of sunlight that filtered through the worn slats of wood. Her golden hair, usually perfectly styled, hung loose and tangled around her shoulders, The yellow sundress she wore, once her favorite, now barely contained her 7 months pregnant form. "They'll send me away," she whispered, her voice hoarse from hours of crying. "Daddy found the letter I was writing to you, he knows." Across from her, Elijah Boone crouched with his work hat in his hands, his expression a complex mixture of concern and determination. At 32, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had navigated a life of injustices without letting them break his spirit. "We'll figure something out," he said softly, though uncertainty shadowed his words. "I've been saving money, we could—" The barn door crashed open with such force that it splintered against the wall. Thomas Willoughby filled the doorframe, his imposing figure backlit by the harsh midday sun. Behind him stood 2 of his foremen, their expressions grim. "Get away from my daughter," Willoughby growled, each word dripping with disgust. Helen stood up shakily. "Daddy, please." "Silence," Willoughby roared, his face contorted with rage. "You've brought enough shame on this family." Elijah rose slowly to his full height, placing himself between Helen and her father. "Mr. Willoughby, I love your daughter, and I love our child. I want to do right by them both." The words hung in the heavy summer air for just a moment before Willoughby lunged forward. His fist connected with Elijah's jaw with a sickening crack that echoed through the barn. Elijah staggered but remained standing, making no move to fight back, even as blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. "Daddy, stop!" Helen screamed, trying to push past the foreman who now held her arms. Willoughby didn't stop. He struck Elijah again, then again, each blow punctuated by a vicious slur. When Elijah finally fell to his knees, Willoughby seized him by the collar. "You're finished in Missouri," he hissed, his face inches from Elijah's. "If I ever see you again, I'll kill you myself. That abomination my daughter is carrying will never bear your name. It will never exist as far as the world is concerned." As the foreman dragged Elijah from the barn, Helen broke free and ran to him, pressing something into his hand, a folded piece of paper. "Find him," she whispered urgently. "Someday, when it's safe, care for him if fate allows it." The memory dissolved, replaced by the harsh fluorescent lights of Memorial Children's Hospital in the present day. Elijah Boone sat beside Mabel's bed, his calloused fingers gently brushing against the blue headscarf that covered her bare scalp. The child slept fitfully, her small chest rising and falling beneath the thin hospital blanket. The IV machine beside her bed beeped softly, marking each precious drop of medicine entering her frail body. Dr. Chen entered the room quietly, clipboard in hand. Her usual professional demeanor seemed strained, her eyes avoiding Elijah's as she checked Mabel's vitals. "Mr. Boone," she finally said, her voice low so as not to wake the sleeping child, "we need to talk about Mabel's treatment." Elijah nodded, carefully disentangling his hand from his granddaughter's and following the doctor into the hallway. The hospital corridor was quiet at this late hour, the only sounds the distant squeak of rubber-soled shoes and the hum of medical equipment. "The board met this afternoon," Dr. Chen began, her words measured. "Without that deposit by tomorrow, they're going to give Mabel's spot in the trial to another patient. There's a waiting list and—" "I understand," Elijah interrupted gently. "Business is business, even when it's a child's life." Dr. Chen's professional composure faltered. "I fought for her, Mr. Boone. I told them about everything you've sacrificed already. Your farm, your savings." "The farm was just land," Elijah repeated, the same words he'd said before, though now they carried a weight of finality. "Just dirt and buildings? Mabel is blood. She's the future. But without the money, I'll have it," Elijah insisted, though the lines around his eyes deepened. "I made a promise to her mother before she passed. I won't fail her daughter now." As Dr. Chen walked away, her white coat swishing softly against the polished floors, Elijah leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. The weight of decades pressed down on him. Choices made and unmade, paths taken and abandoned, promises kept through impossible circumstances. He thought of Bradley Wilkes, the hotel manager with Helen's eyes and jaw, the boy who had grown up never knowing who he truly was, raised in wealth but robbed of his heritage. Elijah had watched him from afar for years, this son who was never allowed to be his son. Every milestone, every achievement followed through newspaper clippings and social media posts, a father's love expressed through silent distance. And now there was Mabel, his only grandchild, fighting for her life while the treatment that could save her remained just beyond reach. The irony was cruel. The grandson who didn't know him controlled vast wealth, while the granddaughter who adored him faced death without resources that could save her. Across town at the Golden Pine, Bradley Wilkes sat in his darkened office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his troubled face. He had spent hours searching for information about Mabel Boone, and what he found had left him shaken to his core. Memorial Children's Hospital records showed Mabel Boone, age 8, diagnosed with a rare form of leukemia that required experimental treatment not covered by insurance. Her mother, Angela Boone, had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. The sole guardian was listed as Elijah Boone, maternal grandfather, which made Mabel his niece. Bradley opened the land deed again, studying the terms of the trust. The property, worth millions in development potential, was to be held for Mabel's benefit, with proceeds from agricultural operations funding a foundation for children's medical research. It was a legacy, not for himself, the son Elijah had lost, but for Mabel, the granddaughter he was desperate to save. The realization hit Bradley with unexpected force. Elijah hadn't come to the Golden Pine to confront him or to claim a relationship. He had come to secure Mabel's future, to ensure that the family fortune, built on land that should have been Elijah's all along, would help his granddaughter and others like her. Bradley looked again at the trust document, at the signature line where his name was listed as trustee. Elijah was offering him a chance to be part of something meaningful, something that transcended the petty luxuries of his carefully constructed life. With sudden clarity, Bradley understood that he faced the same choice his mother had faced decades ago, to acknowledge the truth and act with courage, or to hide behind privilege and pretense. The deed sat before him, waiting for his signature, a bridge between past and future, between what was lost and what might yet be saved. Dawn painted the hospital windows with pale gold light as Bradley Wilkes made his way through the quiet corridors of Memorial Children's Hospital. He'd barely slept, his mind a turbulent storm of revelations and decisions that had kept him pacing his apartment until the first hint of sunrise. Now, with the land deed and trust papers tucked securely in his leather portfolio, he approached room 312 with uncertain steps. He'd never been in a children's hospital before. The cheerful murals and colorful decorations seemed at odds with the serious business happening within these walls, the fight for young lives, the battles waged with medicine and hope against implacable diseases. A nurse at the station gave him a curious look as he passed, his tailored suit and polished shoes, marking him as someone who didn't belong in these early morning hours when only family members usually visited. Bradley paused outside the door, his hand hovering over the handle. Through the small window, he could see Elijah Boone sitting beside a small bed, his weathered hand gently holding the much smaller one of a child. The old man's lips moved in what appeared to be a quiet prayer or perhaps a story, his expression one of such tender devotion that Bradley felt like an intruder just watching. The child, Mabel, lay against white pillows, a bright blue headscarf covering her head. Even from this distance, Bradley could see the pronounced hollows in her cheeks, the fragile quality of her skin stretched over 2 prominent bones. Yet there was something undeniably vibrant about her, a spark that illness hadn't dimmed. Bradley took a deep breath and knocked softly. Elijah looked up, surprise briefly crossing his face before it settled back into its usual composed expression. He leaned down to whisper something to Mabel, then rose and came to the door. "Mr. Wilkes," he said quietly as he stepped into the hallway, closing the door partially behind him. "I didn't expect to see you here." Bradley struggled to find the right words. All night he had rehearsed what he would say, how he would approach this moment. But standing face to face with Elijah, with his father, every practiced phrase evaporated. "I read everything," he finally managed, his voice lower and less confident than usual. "The land deed, the trust documents, the hospital records." Elijah's expression revealed nothing, but his eyes, the same deep brown as Bradley's own, a fact that now seemed glaringly obvious, studied his face with careful attention. "And what did you learn?" Elijah asked. "That she's my niece," Bradley replied. "That she's dying. That you've given up everything to try to save her." A flicker of emotion crossed Elijah's face. Pain, perhaps, or simply acknowledgement of truths laid bare. "What do you want from me?" Bradley continued, a hint of his earlier defensiveness returning. "Why bring me into this now, after all these years?" Elijah glanced back through the door's window at Mabel, his gaze softening. "I didn't come looking for you, son. I came for her. The rest," he shook his head slightly, The rest is just the past catching up in ways I couldn't control. The word son landed between them, simple and devastating in its honesty. Bradley felt something crack inside him, a wall he hadn't realized he'd built, protecting him from truths he hadn't known he was avoiding. "She needs the treatment," Bradley said, not a question but a statement. Elijah nodded. "By noon today, or they give her spot to another child." Bradley's fingers tightened around the portfolio. "And the money?" "I've done what I can," Elijah replied, a hint of defeat in his voice for the first time. "Sold everything that was mine to sell. It's not enough." The simplicity of the statement, the quiet dignity with which Elijah acknowledged his powerlessness in the face of his granddaughter's need, stirred something profound in Bradley. All his life, he had defined himself by acquisition, status, wealth, achievement. Standing here in this hospital corridor, those things suddenly seemed hollow compared to the depth of love that had driven Elijah to give up everything for a child's chance at life. "Let me see her," Bradley said, surprising himself with the request. Elijah studied him for a long moment, then nodded and opened the door. Mabel looked even smaller up close, lost in the white expanse of hospital bedding. Her eyes, the same shape as Bradley's as Elijah's, opened as they approached, brightening with recognition at the sight of her grandfather. "Who's that, Grandpa?" she asked, her voice surprisingly strong despite her frail appearance. Elijah hesitated, his hand resting gently on her blanket-covered foot. "This is Mr. Wilkes. He's a friend." Bradley felt a strange tightness in his chest as those curious eyes turned to him, examining him with the unfiltered directness unique to children. "You look like Grandpa," Mabel observed, her head tilting slightly, around the eyes. A startled laugh escaped Bradley, unexpected and genuine. "I've been told I have serious eyes." Mabel's smile revealed a missing front tooth. "Grandpa's eyes are serious too, except when he's telling stories or making pancakes. Then they get all crinkly at the corners," she demonstrated by scrunching her own face comically. Bradley found himself smiling back, drawn in by her unaffected charm despite the gravity of her situation. "What kind of stories does he tell?" "The best ones," Mabel said with absolute conviction. "About the farm where he grew up, and the horses he trained, and the girl with golden hair who lived in the big house on the hill." Bradley's smile faltered slightly. "Helen, his mother. The stories were about his mother. She's going to come see me someday," Mabel continued, oblivious to the emotional current now running between the two men. "Grandpa promised. When I'm stronger." A nurse entered the room, interrupting the moment. "Time for morning meds, Miss Mabel," she announced cheerfully, though her eyes registered surprise at Bradley's presence. "We'll step out," Elijah said, squeezing Mabel's hand once before moving toward the door. In the hallway, Bradley stood silent for a long moment, processing what he'd just experienced. The immediate connection he'd felt to this child he'd never known existed until yesterday. "The treatment," he finally said. "How much is still needed?" "Just over 200,000, Elijah replied. "I have about half that from selling the farm and everything else." Bradley nodded, decision crystallizing. Without another word, he opened his portfolio and removed his checkbook, the personal one, not the hotel's. With quick, decisive strokes, he wrote out a check for the full amount needed and handed it to Elijah. "Mr. Wilkes," Elijah began, his composure finally cracking to reveal astonishment. "Bradley," he corrected quietly, "or whatever you want to call me, but not Mr. Wilkes, not between us." Elijah looked down at the check, his weathered fingers trembling slightly. "Why?" It was a simple question that demanded a complex answer, one Bradley wasn't sure he could fully articulate yet even to himself. "Because she's family," he said finally, "and because you were right about the inheritance." Before Elijah could respond, the nurse who had been with Mabel hurried from the room toward them, her expression bright with excitement. "Mr. Boone, the treatment has been approved. The financial office just called down. Someone has covered the entire program cost, not just the initial deposit." Both men froze, exchanging confused glances. Bradley looked at his uncashed check, still in Elijah's hand. "Who?" Elijah asked, his voice barely audible. "They said it was arranged by someone named Elijah Boone," the nurse replied, beaming. "The payment was processed digitally about 20 minutes ago." As the nurse returned to Mabel's room, sharing the good news, Bradley and Elijah stood in stunned silence. Who could have paid for the treatment in Elijah's name? Who even knew about their situation? The answer to that question, and to so many others still hanging between father and son, would have to wait. For now there was only the miracle of hope restored, of time granted that had seemed lost just hours before, and in that miracle lay the first tentative bridge between past and future, between what had been broken and what might yet be healed. 3 days after Mabel's treatment began, the hospital room had transformed. Where once sterile walls had dominated, now colorful drawings hung in cheerful chaos, Mabel's artistic output increasing with each day of renewed hope. The experimental treatment had already shown promising signs, her doctors cautiously optimistic about the preliminary blood work results. Though still weak, color had returned to her cheeks, and her appetite had improved enough for her to complain about hospital food, a development Elijah celebrated as if she'd won an Olympic medal. Bradley had visited each day, awkwardly at first, bringing elaborate gifts that Mabel accepted with polite confusion. By the 3rd day, he'd figured out that simple treasures, a book of riddles, crayons in unusual colors, a small kaleidoscope, delighted her far more than the expensive electronic toys that now sat neglected in the corner. On this bright afternoon, Bradley sat in the vinyl visitor's chair, watching as Elijah helped Mabel with a puzzle. The natural ease between grandfather and granddaughter still amazed him, the gentle teasing, the shared glances, the shorthand of people who truly knew each other. It was a kind of love Bradley had never experienced in his adoptive home, where achievements were celebrated, but vulnerability was considered weakness. "Your piece is upside down, Grandpa," Mabel giggled, her blue headscarf slightly askew after an energetic round of pillow puppets. "Well, I'll be," Elijah replied with exaggerated surprise, flipping the puzzle piece. "Good thing I have you to keep me straight." Their laughter, hers bright as wind chimes, his a deep rumble, filled the room with a warmth that seemed to transcend the hospital setting. Bradley found himself smiling, drawn into their circle of simple joy, despite the lingering questions that still haunted him. The mystery of who had paid for Mabel's treatment remained unsolved. The hospital financial office had confirmed only that the payment had come through a lawyer's trust account, with explicit instructions to credit it to Elijah Boone. Bradley had made discreet inquiries through the hotel's connections, but had uncovered nothing conclusive. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Dr. Chen entered with her usual clipboard, but today her professional smile seemed more genuine. "I have good news," she announced, looking from Mabel to Elijah. "The latest markers show significant improvement. If this continues, we might be able to transition to outpatient treatment in a few weeks." Mabel's eyes widened. "I can go home?" Dr. Chen nodded. "Not immediately, but soon if things keep improving. You'd still need to come back regularly for treatments and monitoring." "I can show Bradley the treehouse," Mabel exclaimed, turning to her grandfather with excitement. "And he can see the chickens and the creek where we catch frogs." Bradley felt a strange tightness in his chest at being included so naturally in her future plans. "I'd like that," he said, surprised by how much he meant it. As Dr. Chen reviewed the treatment plan with Elijah, Bradley's phone buzzed with a text message. Glancing down, he saw it was from the hotel's front desk. "Urgent visitor for Mr. Boone in the lobby. Says her name is Helen Grace Callahan." The name hit Bradley like an electric shock. Helen Grace, his mother, the golden-haired girl from Elijah's stories, the woman who had given him away. He stood abruptly, phone clutched tightly in his hand. "I need to go back to the hotel," he said, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "There's someone there. Someone asking for you, Elijah." Elijah looked up sharply, something in Bradley's tone alerting him to the significance. "Who?" he asked simply. Bradley hesitated, glancing at Mabel, who was happily absorbed in her puzzle again. "Helen," he said quietly. "Helen Grace." The color drained from Elijah's face. For the first time since Bradley had met him, the old man seemed truly shaken. His hands, always so steady even in difficult moments, trembled slightly as he set down the puzzle piece he'd been holding. "She's here?" Elijah whispered, disbelief evident in every syllable. "After all these years?" Bradley nodded, his own emotions too complex to name. Anger, curiosity, fear, and something deeper he couldn't yet identify. Elijah turned to Mabel, who was now watching them with curious eyes. "Little bird, I need to go with Bradley for a while. There's someone I need to see." "Is it her?" Mabel asked, surprising both men. "The lady from your stories? The one with sunshine hair?" A small, sad smile touched Elijah's lips. "Yes, little bird. It might be." Mabel nodded solemnly. "It's okay, Grandpa. I'll be fine with Nurse Jenny. You should wear your blue shirt, though. It matches your eyes better." This unexpected fashion advice broke the tension, drawing a startled laugh from both men. Elijah leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I'll remember that for next time. You finish that puzzle, and I'll be back before dinner." In the hospital parking lot, neither man spoke as they got into Bradley's sleek German sedan. The contrast was stark. Bradley in his tailored suit behind the wheel of a luxury vehicle, Elijah in his simple clothes beside him. Father and son, separated by decades of secrets and silence, now united by circumstances neither could have predicted. "What do you think she wants?" Bradley finally asked, as they pulled onto the main road, his voice carefully neutral. Elijah stared out the window, watching the Missouri landscape roll past. "I don't know," he admitted. "I haven't seen her since." He trailed off, the weight of unspoken history hanging in the air between them. "Since the day in the barn," Bradley finished for him. "The day they took you away from her, from me." Elijah turned to look at him, surprise evident in his expression. "You know about that? Dolores told me some, and I've been dreaming about it. Fragments, images, a barn, sunlight through wooden slats, a man's angry voice." Bradley's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "Are they memories somehow? Is that possible? You were still inside your mother then," Elijah said gently. "Not yet born, but perhaps some things get carried in the blood, passed down like the color of eyes or the shape of hands." The drive continued in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts as they approached the Golden Pine Hotel. In the parking lot, Bradley turned off the engine but made no move to exit the car. "I should warn you," he said finally. "She's not alone. The name on the visitor log is Helen Grace Callahan. She married Walter Callahan, the owner of the hotel chain." Elijah nodded slowly, absorbing this information with the same quiet dignity with which he seemed to face everything. "Life has its own way of completing circles," he said. "She found safety then. That's good." The simple grace of his response, the complete absence of bitterness or resentment, humbled Bradley in ways he couldn't articulate. In the hotel lobby, a slender woman in her 60s sat alone on a brocade sofa, her silver blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon. Though time had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth, there was still a remarkable beauty to her features, a delicacy that reminded Bradley of old photographs he'd seen of Golden Age film stars. Helen Grace Callahan looked up as they entered, her posture perfect, her hands folded neatly in her lap. But when her gaze fell on Elijah, something shifted in her composed demeanor, a tremor passing through her carefully constructed poise. She rose slowly, like someone approaching an altar. "Elijah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "after all this time." For a moment, the bustling hotel lobby seemed to fade away, leaving only these two people connected by a past that had shaped all their lives, and Bradley's, in irrevocable ways. Elijah stepped forward, stopping just short of reaching for her. "Helen," he said, his voice warm with memories. "You look well." She smiled then, a genuine smile that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. Without another word, she closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around Elijah's weathered form. He stood frozen for just a moment before his arms came up to return the embrace, holding her with a tenderness that spoke of decades of undiminished feeling. Bradley watched, an outsider to this moment, yet inextricably bound to it. These two people, this unlikely pair separated by race, class, and circumstance, had created him. Their forbidden love had been his beginning, even as their forced separation had defined the course of all their lives. As Helen and Elijah held each other, 30 years of absence dissolving in the silent language of reunion, Bradley understood with sudden clarity who had paid for Mabel's treatment. The mystery was solved, but larger questions remained. Questions of family and forgiveness, of choices made and unmade, of how to build a future on the foundation of a complicated past. The greatest inheritance isn't money or property, it's the truth. Elijah Boone never sought revenge or recognition. He simply carried his dignity through decades of injustice, focusing on what truly mattered, love and family. When faced with losing his granddaughter, he returned to confront the past not with anger, but with quiet resolve. Would you have found that same strength after all those years? Could you have looked into the eyes of those who once mocked you and still offered forgiveness? Sometimes the land that no one sees holds the richest soil. The fields that Elijah worked were never just dirt and crops. They were the foundation of a legacy built on sacrifice and unconditional love. Bradley discovered that his privileged life was built on hollow ground until he embraced his true heritage. What parts of your own story remain unexamined? What invisible connections might be waiting to transform your understanding of who you truly are? If this story touched your heart, remember that we all face moments where we must choose between holding on to bitterness or planting seeds of reconciliation. Follow our channel for more stories that will challenge you to look deeper. Share with someone who needs to hear this message today, and leave a comment telling us what you would have done in Elijah's shoes. Sometimes the most powerful statement is made not through loud declarations, but through the quiet dignity that refuses to be broken.